Hello, everyone. Tonight's lecture is going to be on Chapter 9 and Chapter 7. This Chapter 9, I'm going to try to fly through really quickly. It's just, continuing on with the six elements of a contract. Going to go into a little bit further detail of mutual agreement. If you guys remember back from your chapter on on contracts, you had the six elements of the contract, and then you had mutual agreement, which was basically a meeting of the minds, which we're going to go into here in a little bit further detail. Give me 1 second here. So mutual agreement is the second part or the second element to be an enforceable contract. So let's go ahead and get started here. So defective agreement's a meeting of the minds. Genuine assent is the second of six requirements necessary for an enforceable contract. And again, I stress the term enforceable. Genuineness of assent to a contract is present when there is evidence of a true meeting of the minds of the parties to an agreement. Some ways to define defective agreements: if there are misunderstandings, use of force, or deception to obtain agreement by either party, the contract is voidable. That is, it may be disaffirmed at the option of the injured party. So think about that: used by force, kind of a mob tactic, force somebody into a contract, right? Voidable contract results if agreement or either party is obtained by fraud, misrepresentation, mistake, undue influence, or duress. And we'll quickly talk about all of those. A voidable contract may result if the contract is one of adhesion or is unconscionable, which we'll talk about what defines that as well. So fraud, obviously we've all heard that term. Intentional misstatement or non-disclosure of material fact made by one party to influence the actions of another party is fraud. Fraud may arise from spoken or written words or acts by conduct. Fraudulent misrepresentation arises when the party who relies on the misstatement or non-disclosure suffers a loss, damages from the act. Intentional concealment or non-disclosure of material facts is just as fraudulent as making a false statement. So again, concealment or non-disclosure. If you know the truth and you say you don't, that also can be considered fraudulent and look premeditated, right? Some examples here. In order to prove a case of fraud, a plaintiff must demonstrate five elements. So know this here. These are the five elements one must demonstrate if they're ordered to prove a case for fraud. So first would be a misstatement or non-disclosure of a material fact, knowledge of its falsity or with reckless disregard of its truth, intention of causing other party to enter into the agreement, four, reliance by the injured party, and finally, harm to injured party, financial, physical, or both detriment. Let me give you an example here from example 9.1. Eppers went to Micro New Age Computer Store to buy a personal computer so he could process his large collection of digital photos. Donaldson, the owner of the store, quickly sensed that Eppers did not know much about computers and also recognized that Eppers was unfamiliar with how much money would be necessary to run most available photo processing software packages. In response to Eppers' questions about the memory of a particular model, Donaldson assured him that the model would accommodate any software on the market and any likely to be developed in the foreseeable future. Eppers, relying on Donaldson's assurances, bought the model that was recommended. To his dismay, Eppers quickly discovered that the memory was inadequate for many popular photo processing software programs. So here we're seeing all of those six examples happen, right? A misstatement or non-disclosure, all the way down to harm to the individual when they're trying to use this software that actually doesn't have the enough memory or inadequate memory to facilitate this individual's needs. So that's an example of fraud. Puffing, we've all heard this before. There's a distinct difference between fraudulent misstatement or a salesperson's puffing, right? Puffing is considered a mere expression of opinion, usually exaggerated. Most people have experienced puffing when speaking to a salesperson. And I always think of car salesmen, folks, going back to here, like if you say, hey, I want to buy a car that can get to 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, they say, hey, this can do it in 2 seconds and blah, blah, blah. They're kind of, that's kind of a fraud, right? They're actually misrepresenting the product that they're selling. If they say things like, hey, you look great in this car was meant for you type of thing, that's just puffing. Hey, this red shirt looks great on you, or this washing machine is the best buy in town. The computer is as good as other well-known brands. The engine in this car has the latest hybrid technology. This is just kind of like salesmanship. It's not fraudulent. It can't harm you if you kind of accept these statements as truth or whatever. So again, puffing is just good salesmanship, and obviously fraud and fraudulent behavior is against the law. Misrepresentation is an unintentional misstatement or non-disclosure of material fact that results in inducing another to enter into an agreement to his or her loss detriment. So again, misrepresentation, again, is the key word here, unintentional. So again, look at fraud. It's going to be intentional. Like you thought it out. It was premeditated. You want to fraud somebody into a purchase or out of their money. Puffing is just gamesmanship. Hey, red looks great on you. Man, I tell you what, that car looks great when you're driving it. Things like that. And then, of course, misrepresentation, of course, is the unintentional misstatement. Remedy is different for fraud. For example, an injured party proving fraud may have contract canceled and sue for additional damages. An injured party proving misrepresentation may have the contract canceled, but normally cannot sue for additional damages. This misrepresentation is simply a mistake, right? So although you can, get out of your contract, you're not going to be able to sue for additional damages 9 times out of 10. Let me read example 9.2. Arnold hired Blue Water Pool Company to build a swimming pool in his backyard. It was only after construction had begun that Arnold learned from a neighbor that local zoning ordinance prohibited backyard swimming pools in the community. The salesperson for Blue Water admitted that he had been thinking about another community where no prohibitions existed. Arnold may void the contract, but he may not seek additional damages because Blue Water's misrepresentation was unintentional and not fraudulent. So again, know those differences. Misrepresentation, unintentional; fraud, intentional. Puffing is permissible, meaning you can do that. A mistake is an act that is not in accord with the facts. Mistakes relating to contracts may concern the nature of the subject matter or quality of the subject matter. Court decisions involving mistakes are often complex, and courts attempt to determine whether the mistake was unilateral, meaning coming from one person, or mutual, made by both individuals. So again, a unilateral mistake is a mistake made by only one party. This can be blurry in relation to misrepresentation, and it depends on the circumstances. A lot of times these kind of get confused. A mutual mistake is a mistake made by obviously both parties. For a contract to be dissolved due to a mistake, the law usually requires both parties to be a part of the mistake, a mutual mistake. And here's a great example. Chen, a painting dealer, offered to sell a particular Picasso painting, catalog number 1401, to Kovacs for $14,000. When it came time to exchange the painting for the money, it was obvious that Kovacs expected a different Picasso painting, catalog number 1410. So we can see how the 0 and 1 just got reversed here, right? Chen believed Kovacs wanted to buy catalog number 1401. The contract can be canceled by either party because this was a mutual mistake. Everybody see that? Just a simple mutual mistake. And again, this is an important caveat. For a contract to be dissolved due to a mistake, the law usually requires both parties to be a part of a mistake. So if it's a unilateral mistake, a lot of times that's going to be kind of considered misrepresentation, where it's an honest mistake, so it's misrepresentation. And then you have mutual mistake when it comes into play that both parties make an error of some kind. Undue influence, this always reminds me of like how the mob used to kind of run New York. They go into a deli shop and say, I'd hate to see something happen to your facility. If you, I hate to see it burn down. If you pay us $20 a week, we'll make sure it doesn't burn down. And here's another example, really, where this really comes into play. But at times, a person may have power to control actions of another due to a special or confidential relationship. Obviously, physician, patient, teacher, student, nurse, patient, lawyer, client, right? When a person uses such power improperly to their personal advantage, it is undue influence. The contract resulting from use of undue influence is voidable at the option of the wrongfully influenced party. So again, undue influence, you're going to get any questions about this, they're going to put them in that kind of category of a teacher, a doctor, or a physician of some kind. Let me kind of read this example. And I have no idea if I'm going to pronounce this name correctly in the book, but I'm going to give it my best shot. Who, a professor of electrical engineering, was working with a foreign student, Placido, sorry, on a new ceramic compound in the field of superconductivity, who encouraged his student to continue his research and said that he would undertake to secure the patient on the new compound in both names. Placido was suspicious about the arrangement suggested by Hu, but to recognize Hu's influence over him. Once the patent was issued, Placido realized that it was his work and inventiveness that had resulted in the new compound, and not that of his professor. In this case, the court would likely find that the relationship between professor and student resulted in undue influence. Essentially, the teacher, professor, wanted to steal his thunder, right? He wanted to be credited for this new compound, but in fact, it was the students. And abusing his position over him, he tried to take credit for that accomplishment. Again, I kind of messed up the Sopranos or kind of mob example with undue influence with duress. So subtract that from the earlier example and know that undue influence is usually just like these relationships between professor and student, doctor and patient, lawyer and client, so on and so forth. Now, duress is a great example. That's why you see I have the Sopranos here. Duress is the act of applying unlawful or improper pressure or influence to a person in order to gain their agreement to a contract. So going back to my mistake a minute ago, but the example I gave was, you've got a deli shop and you're on 105th Street in Manhattan, and all of a sudden you get a knock on a door from two guys that say, "Hey man, I'd love to hate to see your place get broken into every week or burned down by Friday. If you give me, $1,000 a week, I'll make sure that your place stays safe. Nobody's going to break into it. It's never going to burn down." And, kind of give them the wink, right? And that's would be considered duress. You're essentially putting this person in harm's way to either comply with your contractual, desires or payment, or, face some sort of undue harm. So threat of bodily harm to an individual, their family, or to personal reputation, defamation, threat of serious loss or damage to property. If someone enters into a contract under duress, the injured party may void the agreement. Let's read example 9.6 here. Lawrence bought several expensive shirts to a laundry service for cleaning. A note of the receipt he has given indicated that the establishment was not responsible for goods left over 30 days. Lawrence attempted to pick up. Let me make sure I'm reading the right example. Sorry, it's not 9.6, actually 9.5. Sorry. Brent, the owner of a small trunking company, called on Goodwin, president of Goodwin Manufacturing Company, to sell his company's trunking services. As he concluded their conversation, Brent indicated that it would be a good idea to agree to hire Brent's company to handle Goodwin's trucking needs because their companies that did not utilize Brent's company's services often experience unexpected fires. Brent's message was clearly a threat, and Goodwin agreed to sign the contract for trucking services. The contract is voidable and could be rescinded by Goodwin because of the duress applied by Brent. So that's a great example there. So again, kind of looking at all of these, we've got, fraud, which is a flat out, a criminal activity from start to finish. To prove a case of fraud, you have to show these 5 elements. Huffing is permitted salesmanship or gamesmanship, whatever you want to call it. Misrepresentation is an unintentional mistake or misstatement or non-disclosure of material fact. So again, that's honest, and it's not the same as fraud. Mistake is usually made and are usually defined as when 2 people make a mistake. The UCC prefer to view it that way, as a mutual mistake. Otherwise, it's simply misrepresentation. And then, of course, we have undue influence, which is that relationship between physician and patient, student and teacher, so on and so forth. And then, of course, duress, I always kind of call the Sopranos example. All right, now let's talk about contracts of adhesion. Contract that involves parties who have unequal bargaining power, known as take it or leave it contracts. Adhesion contracts, though common and are normally enforceable, but when enforcement of an otherwise legal contract results in significant hardship to one of the parties, courts do consider such agreements unfair and unenforceable. Let's kind of talk about some of these. Inequality of bargaining power exists in contracts prepared by one party and presented to the other without opportunity for true negotiation. Example, Lorenz bought shirts to a laundry service for cleaning, which we've already given. Let me go ahead and read this example here. I was going to read it from the book, but I'll read it straight from the slideshow. Lorenz bought shirts to a laundry service for cleaning. A note of the receipt he was given indicated that the establishment was not responsible for goods left over 30 days. Lorenz attempted to pick up his shirts 35 days later and was told that under contract terms, he was not entitled to them. The 30-day clause would be a contract of adhesion. Makes sense? Pretty simple stuff. Unconscionable contracts, what they're going to be is exactly how they sound, is regarded as shockingly unjust or unfair as to offend the public. While courts are reluctant to uphold such contracts, more recently, the UCC, Uniform Commercial Code, has made unconscionable contracts much less likely to be enforced. Note, many states now have laws with criminal penalties against unconscionable contracts forced on the elderly. Under the UCC, if there's a judicial finding of unconscionability, the court may refuse to enforce the contract or strike any unconscionable clause and enforce remainder of the contract, or limit application of any unconscionable clause to avoid unconscionable result. Let me read example 9.7. The sales representative for Frosty Fresh Corporation sold a freezer to Renaso, who spoke little English. The salesperson neither translated nor explained the contract, but told Renaso that the freezer would cost nothing because he would receive a bonus of $25 for each sale made to his friends. The total price of the freezer made with periodic payments would have been more than $1,100. The cash price would have been $900, and the wholesale price of the company would have been $348. The court ruled that the contract was unconscionable and awarded the company a reasonable profit, service, and the finance charges, and its own cost of $348. So that's an example of unconscionable contracts. And again, that's chapter 9 was very quick and very easy. Know these definitions, which are really easy, and you should have no trouble with questions or anything on the test. Now let's switch over to chapter 17, I believe. Give me 1 second. All right, this slideshow, or this chapter is going to be a lot more kind of applicable to our everyday life. I'm sure most of us won't be thinking about mutual agreement much after this class, but again, it highlights the importance to know those 6 elements of a contract, folks. So make sure you do. All right, so let's talk about sales and the law around it. Law of sales affects many individuals and businesses and is very comprehensive. It does not include investment securities, real estate, or services. So again, the law of sales does not include investment securities, real estate, property, or like services. And there's a difference between goods and services, right? Goods are physical items. Services are often like plumbing or electrical work or consultation, something that is not like a tangible piece of property. Contracts for services are considered ordinary contracts and are not covered by the UCC. In transactions involving both goods and services, a court looks to predominate portion of contract to determine whether it is a sales contract for goods or services contract for repairs. And sometimes I always think about a plumber. A plumber comes in, he's going to provide a service, but he also has to bring a new toilet. So there's an actual good. So in that case, that's going to be looked at by a court to determine which was it predominantly service or was it predominantly a good. You get a new engine put in your car, there's a lot of goods there and there's a lot of service. So to me, that's always a tough one for them to figure out which one is it going to go to. Is it going to be judged and governed by the UCC because it's a sale of a good, or is it going to be under other bodies of law because it's a sale for services? So real quick, Paul is going to ask you your first question of the night of the lecture to be counted present for this week's class. What is your favorite city in South Carolina? That's the first question. And then here later, we'll ask that second question. So again, the question for the first question you're going to have to answer in an email to me is what your favorite city in South Carolina is. All right, contracts for sale versus contracts to sale. Notice the different spelling. Contract for sale, legally enforceable agreement whose purpose is immediate transfer of title to personal property in return for consideration. Maybe for a present sale of goods or a sale of future goods. Sale is defined as passing of title from seller to buyer for a price. Payment may be in the form of money or goods. So again, legally enforceable agreement whose purpose is immediate transfer of title to personal property in return for consideration. So if you sell a TV out of your home, it's intended for immediate. The consideration would be it's $100 and you can have this TV, right? So existing goods, goods that physically exist and are owned by a seller at the time of the sale. So if you come over to my house and I'm having a yard sale and you see the TV there, it's a good that exists today. It doesn't need to be worked on. It doesn't need to have anything done to it. It's ready to sell today. It's an existing good. Future goods, this is a great example here. This slide provides growing crops, timber, puppies, like you're going to buy. Like we bought a German Shepherd puppy like 3 years ago. We still have today. And we bought him before he was even born. And so we were buying something for a future good. Now, if something were to happen to the mother of the puppies before our good was received, title hadn't been passed yet, which we'll talk about here soon. Agreement to sell future good is considered a contract to sale in contrast to a contract for sale. So in a contract to sale, SELL, we're talking about future goods. In contrast to contract for sale, SELE, you're talking about the immediate transfer of property. The distinction between existing and future goods is important because a person cannot sell goods to which they do not hold title. In almost every case, courts have held title to future goods remains with the seller. So what did I say about the puppy? If something would have happened to the mother, we paid like $1,100 for the German Shepherd puppy before it was given to us, and the mother died, that the owner of that female German Shepherd would have to reimburse our money because title stayed with them until it was given over to us, right? Let me read example 17.1 and 17.2. 17.1, Jessup agreed to sell an amateur radio transmitter to Makata for $750. Makata paid the agreed price, and Jessup gave him the equipment. That's a contract for sale, SELE, right? Now let's look at a contract for sale, SELL, or a contract to sell. Kierman paid a $500 deposit to Montrose, a breeder of pedigreed dogs, who agreed to sell Kierman a male puppy from the next litter of his prized terrier for $1,200. Before the terrier gave birth to the expected litter, it was killed in a fire that destroyed the kennel. Kierman demanded the return of his deposit, claiming that the title to the puppy did not pass until delivery was made. Montrose demanded the balance of the agreed price, $1,200, claiming that the unborn puppy belonged to Kierman from the time of their agreement. Now, obviously, this is not going to happen. The courts have heard many such cases, and almost every one of them, they have held that the title to such future goods remains with the seller. In example 17.2, Kierman would get back his deposit and Montrose would bear the loss. Very simple. So again, existing goods are going to be contracts to sell, SELE. Future goods, contracts to sell, SELL. Just keep that in your head. We've also discussed a little bit of this, and ignore this right here. This is a slideshow from my last class. So that was my class president at the time, just so you know, Asia. All right, so oral, written, express, and implied contracts. Sell contracts may be oral or written, express, or implied. I'm not going to go through the different definitions again because we've already done that recently. Contracts greater than $500 must be in writing to be enforceable. So if you're selling something from your home or your business and it's over $500, if it's not in writing, it won't be enforceable with the law or with the courts. So make sure anything you're selling over $500 is in writing. Complete agreement need not be in writing, but should evidence intent of the parties. So in other words, should show the consideration. I'm giving you A for B. Contract must be signed by the parties. Very simple. Again, we've talked about entire and divisible sales contracts. Difference between entire contracts and divisible contracts is distinct and may be seen in many business transactions. Again, the entire contract, because of all components are interdependent, and included in same order, payment for contract would not be required until the whole order is fulfilled. That goes back, if you ordered again a swing set from me, you get everything but the swings itself. You don't owe me payment until I get the swings there to hook up so you can actually use the product, right? Or like a kitchen table, you get the table but no chairs. That would be an example of an entire contract, and payment would be due until you got the chairs as well. Divisible contract, if components are ordered as separate entities, payment for each deliverable is due upon delivery. So let's say that we have an office and we order a bunch of printers and new desks and computers. We get the printers in, we owe payment because printers are not dependent really on anything else, right? We get the desk, now we owe the payment for the desk. Let me read example 17.3. Management Mode, a publisher of newsletters, decided to switch from using an outside typesetter to internal desktop publishing to save the cost of typesetting and to speed up its operation. The firm ordered personal computers from CompuWrit for each of its editors and writers, appropriate word processing software, desktop publishing software, in-house training software, and laser printers. Delivery of the equipment and software was scheduled to be made within 30 days of placing the order. However, delivery of the laser printers was delayed for 2 months. Let's see how the court would rule here. Because of all the components are interdependent and were included in the same order, an entire contract payment for the contract would not be required until the whole order was filled. This is an example of which one, folks? It's the entire contract. Oh, sorry, it's the divisible contract. Give me 1 second here. All right. So very simple stuff. Again, entire contract, because all components are interdependent and included in same order, payment for contract would not be required until whole order is fulfilled. That's what example 17.3 is covering. And then, of course, divisible contract, if components are ordered as separate entities, payment for each delivery is due upon delivery. So if you order desk and lamps or desk and, rugs for your office, when the rugs get there, you owe a payment. When the desks get there, you owe another payment. Very simple stuff. All right, contracts for labor and materials. Sales contracts for goods of special design, construction, or manufacture is neither a contract for sale nor a contract to sell. Again, contract for sale, existing goods, contract to sell, future goods. Contract for labor and materials does not have to be in writing to be enforceable, even if it's greater than $500. Keep that caveat on your heads. Contract will not be binding if buyer repudiates, known as cancels, oral contract and seller receives notice before seller made either a substantial start manufacturing goods or commitment for their materials. If seller has begun manufacture and made a commitment, cancellation is not effective. Let me read example 17.4. Little Lucy's Bakery orally contracted with Foremost Conveyor Company for the design and construction of a special conveyor system to be installed in the shipping room of the bakery. After the conveyor was designed, built, and ready to be installed, Little Lucy's hired a new manager. The new manager canceled the order, claiming that it was invalid because it was not in writing. Foremost Conveyor can recover damage from the bakery for breach of contract because the cancellation was received after work and on the conveyor system had begun. So let's go back and look at this example here again. Sorry, right here. So a contract for labor and materials. They'd already begun. It was over $500, but a contract for labor and materials does not have to be in writing. And that's what the new manager tried to claim. Hey, it wasn't in writing, but it doesn't have to be, even if it's over $500. And then it says if the seller has begun manufacture, made a commitment, cancellation is not effective. So in other words, like, for example, when we do a website for a company, we charge 50% down. And that way, if they cancel, because essentially when someone says, I'm ready to go forward, we immediately start working on it. We commit resources and money and time to building their new site. If they try to cancel 3 weeks later, hey, I've already put X amount of dollars into this, It's not fair that you are just able to cancel on a whim. So a very similar thing happens for labor and materials. Essentially, our materials would be kind of digital, but the labor is services that would, a lot of time and money is being spent or being spent as soon as a contract is signed. So it's very difficult for folks to get out of that once they've begun, if not impossible. All right, trial periods and returns. We all know about this. Some sellers are willing to allow prospective customers a trial period or a right of return for merchandise. They used to do this with tennis rackets all the time. You can go like Tennis Warehouse or one of those tennis .coms, and they'll actually send you a racket to use for a while. And if you like it, you can either return it or keep it and then pay for it. Important to determine who owns, has title to merchandise while in prospective buyer's possession in event of loss or damage. An online store sends a customer a vacuum cleaner to try for 30 days before customer makes a decision to buy it. That's an example, right? Now let's talk about kind of how that works. Let's see. So going here, contract, trial periods and returns. Contract of sale with right of return. Sometimes goods are sold on a trial basis. A short trial period will be established during which buyer can use goods. Contract for sale with right of return gives buyers both title to goods and opportunity to return them to seller at a later time. So what do they mean by it gives you title? Well, that means if you break it, you have to pay for it. That's what that means. It's in your possession. You own it. If you return it in the agreed upon time, you don't have to pay for it, and title transfers back to us. But if you break it or keep it beyond the agreed time, you bought it. An invoice is on its way, right? Sale on approval. When contract provides for sale of goods subject to buyer's approval, the transaction is a sale on approval. Goods remain property of seller until buyer has confirmed approval of the goods. So again, contract of sale with right of return, title immediately transfers to the individual that bought it. So when I got that tennis racket in the mail, technically I owned it, meaning if I broke it, I had to pay for it. If I stay past the trial period, I've bought it, right? Sale of approval, the title stays with the seller. Let's read example 17.5 to illustrate that point a little further. The sales representative of Scrub and Clean Equipment was attempting to persuade the manager of River Rock Car Wash to install a new type of car wash brush. The cost of the brushes and uncertainty about their effectiveness made the car wash manager hesitant to make a commitment to buy until he had the opportunity to try the equipment. The sales representative agreed to let the car wash use 4 brushes for 2 months on approval. Reading further, both parties in this case agreed to sell on approval. After using the brushes for a month or two, the car wash manager could agree to purchase them, and at such time, title would pass to the car wash. It is not wise for a potential buyer to let the trial period slip by on the assumption that the seller does not mind, or that if the buyer is getting something for nothing. The buyer must notify the seller of their decision to return the goods. If that is the intention, within the time agreed upon for the trial of the goods, or with a reasonable time, if no time has been agreed upon. If notification is not given during the period, the user's continued prolonged use of the goods on approval could be interpreted as implied consent to buy, and the user could be held responsible for the goods and be obligated to pay for them. So in this case, as long as the car wash manager says, hey, the brushes are here, we've got 30 days to try them, or I'm just going to throw some numbers out here. And if I don't, if you don't hear from 30 days, within 30 days, it can be assumed or implied that I intend to buy them. You can send an invoice. Now and again, based on approval. So what that manager wanted to see is, do these brushes actually work? And let's say that it witnesses that, hey, man, these brushes are great. They're really cleaning cars. They're not damaging them. My customers are much happy. I want to buy them. Or it could be the opposite. These things aren't worth a darn. They're not cleaning my customers' cars. In fact, it damaged one customer's car and I had to pay for it. I don't want these. So that would be an example of approval. So again, contract of sale with right of return, title immediately transfers to the individual that's using the equipment or product or good. Sell on approval, title stays with seller. Sale or return. Most goods sold may be returned for a variety of reasons unless sale is clearly identified as final or circumstances of return are unreasonable. Like for example, with Walmart, you basically can return anything. You can go home and beat it up with a ball bat and say you found it. It was like this in the box, and they'll basically take it back. which is kind of just because they have, you know, they're such a large corporation, you know, they can kind of bear those losses, but they also don't want to seem, you know, difficult to customers. You know, there's a lot of people buying a lot of items and goods out of their stores. And for the most part, you can return anything to Walmart. Now, obviously, there's certain things I don't want even want to get explicit that you can't buy a bag of apples, eat 3 of them, and try to return it, right? And there's a lot of other great examples that are kind of gross. We won't go into. But anyway, seller return, an agreement where seller will accept return of goods at request of buyer. Merchants will agree to sell or return in order to maintain goodwill rather than insist on the fact that the seller is legally obliged to accept return of goods. And that's usually Walmart. Walmart's a great example of that goodwill, right? Other kinds of sales, auction sales, buyer. We've all know about an auction where you get a bidder, right? Speaking real fast or whatever that it might be. The buyer, the party making an offer or bid, right? You know, the bidder's saying, we got $95. Who's got $95? I raise my hand and say 95. Asia raises her hand. She says 100. And then the bids go up. The seller is the owner of the goods, engages an auctioneer to get bids from interested parties with the intent of selling to the highest bidder. That's what most people want to do. They want to get the highest bid. A bidder may retract a bid at any time before hammer falls, and such retraction does not revive any previous bid. Kinds of auctions. This is going to be important here, folks. Auction without reserve. Goods must be sold to the highest bidder and may not be withdrawn after bidding has begun. So if I enter my products or things I want to sell into an auction without reserve, if the highest bidder is $1, I've got to sell it for $1, right? There's a, you know, I've got something worth 10 times or 50 times or 100 times or 1,000 times of that. If the highest bid is $1, I have to sell it for $1. Auction with reserve gives auctioneer right to withdraw goods at any time before announcing completion of sale if bids are not made at or above the reserve amount of seller. So if I was going to sell a tractor or something, I want to go in an auction with reserve. I don't want less than $5,000. If we get bids that don't reach 5,000, it's not being sold, right? I would not want to put that into an auction without reserve and, you know, get the highest bid at $10 and let go of something worth thousands for $10, right? Again, if the reserve amount has been established, it is announced by the auctioneer before bidding even starts. So for example, if I entered my tractor into an auction with reserve, they would say seller has a minimum bid of $500 or $5,000. Bidding begins at $5,000, right? Auction sales are with reserve unless otherwise specified. Other kinds of sales, conditional sales, a way of selling merchandise is with condition, title, and will remain with seller until purchase price has been paid. Buyer cannot legally resell goods purchased this way as title has not passed. A person cannot legally sell goods to which they lack title. Seller may repossess goods if buyer does not pay in time agreed. Conditional sales. I think about consignment shops. It's probably the best one that happens. And I think I don't really know exactly how consignment shops work. But if not mistaken, like a clothing consignment shop, I could take a bunch of clothes and tell the consignment shop, I want to sell all these clothes. And, you know, I'm going to get $5 from the shirt that sells. You're going to get $2 because you're going to sell it for $7 or something like that. Consignment sale occurs when a seller, consigner, a consignee, entrusts goods to a merchant, a consignee. Merchant acts under a contract as seller's agent to sell goods in exchange for fee. So it might be, you know, 20%, and they might do a percentage. You bring in 50 shirts, I'm going to make 20% of all the sales, or I'm going to make 20% from each individual sale, whatever that it might be. And some of you folks may be more familiar with consignment shops, but I think that's, I wish there were more things like that. To me, I see some advantages in that. But anyway, so delivery. This is big. Many transactions require shipment of goods purchased. This is the modern day world, folks. I have not shopped at Walmart or shopped for Christmas or a kid's birthday in a physical location in literally 6 or 7 years. For the last 6 or 7 years, we've bought every Christmas, every birthday, every side gift, special gift, surprise gift. We bought it from Amazon or a place like that where it gets shipped to us. Now, obviously, think about the title. Who has title to it, right? So if a TV shows up that I've ordered from Amazon and it's broken, what happens? I send that thing back. I don't own this thing yet. The title is still with Amazon. You're to send me a product that I accept, sign the paper, plug up, and start watching. Then I own it, right? Many transactions require shipment of goods purchases, we just said, but shipping goods is not without risk. Goods that are in transit have the risk of that damage may occur. Obviously, flood damage, transportation accident, fire. I mean, the list could just be innumerable of what can happen to something in transit in today's world. Generally, a prudent party will make certain goods are insured against loss, but to do so, they must have an insurable interest in goods. So obviously, I would imagine that Amazon has insurance for all of its goods. So if it loses a product in transit, it's not just having to eat the money, because you and me, the buyer, we're not going to eat that. It's not mine until I take it inside, right? Delivery insurable interest. Insurable interest is a right to insure goods against any potential loss. There's insurance on everything. Collectible baseball cards, your vehicle you drive, your home, artwork, ships, you name it. There's insurable interest just on about everything that has any value, right? Sellers have an insurable interest in goods as long as they have title to them. So, for example, Amazon is going to have, I'm sure, I just know they do have own insurance on everything that they sell, right? But I'm not going to have insurance on it. I'm the buyer. Buyers are allowed to insure goods even before they obtain title. Now, this just depends on certain things. Won't get into those details, though. All right, so delivery. Way goods are shipped affects passing of title. So I'm just going to go through this and say it in a way that makes more sense. I mean, I can read the slide, but here's the best way to get this. If I order a TV from Amazon, again, for the 9th time, they have title to it until it's delivered here, and I inspect and see that it's what I've ordered. The TV works, the screen's not busted, everything's here, the remote, even the gift, the gratuitous batteries or whatever you'd call that. Everything's here. So now title passes. If I break it 1 second after I accept it, I have to replace it with my own money. Now let's say that like I ordered a new bedroom suit from Badcock Furniture, and they say, well, for extra $165, we can have it shipped to your home, or you can come get it with your truck. Depending on which one I choose is going to determine when title passes. If I choose to go pick it up myself with a truck that I've rented or a third-party service that I've hired, title passes as soon as they pick it up from Badcock Furniture. If I pay the $165, they have title all the way till it gets to my home. So if they wreck on the way here and the furniture is destroyed, they have to replace it. I don't pay a dime. If I pick it up myself and wreck on the way home, I have to eat the cost because title passed as soon as I got it. So I'll read this slide just for the sake of doing it, but I think you get what I'm saying here. Way goods are shipped affects passing of title. Title to goods shipped by private carrier, delivered by the seller, passes at the time of delivery to buyer. If buyer arranges for delivery, as I just astutely put out, title passes when buyer or his or her agent picks up the goods. If goods are shipped by common carrier, title passes to purchaser according to conditions that follow. All right, so FOB shipping point and FOB destination. FOB means free on board, just so you know. FOB shipping point, titles to good passes from seller to buyer when carrier receives shipment. Buyer pays transportation charges. So just notice that difference. Title to good passes from seller to buyer when carrier, so whoever the carrier is, UPS, Joe Schmo Shipping, they pick up, and I have to pay for the transportation. So I've paid, Joe Schmo Transport $50 to pick up the new piano that I bought. As soon as they get there to get the new piano, I own it. FOB destination, which is what the most things that we deal with these days, especially when it's the everyday average consumer, not a B2B world. In B2B world, shipping point is a lot more used. But in our kind of world, working with Amazon and eBay or whoever else that it might be, we're dealing with FOB destination. Title passes when goods are delivered to buyer. Cost of transporting good is paid to carrier by seller, but usually included in buyer's invoice. Buyer has an advantage in this method of shipment. So obviously, the advantage is if something happens in the amount of things, the innumerable things that can happen when a truck that's heavy and bulky is driving down the road in a world of moving things and weather and environment and potential fears around every corner, right? So again, this is the Amazon example. When it gets to my house and I accept the good, I own it, but I don't own it 1 second before, which obviously gives the advantage to us, the buyer. And so obviously, again, FOB destination is what we as everyday consumers really deal with. FOB shipping point is going to be a lot more of a B2B thing. And when I say B2B, I mean business to business. When I say, you and me, Amazon, I mean B2C, which is business to consumer. And consumer is the end user, like you and me, for example. All right. Remedies for breach of sales contracts. Remedies are available for limited time. UCC, again, the Uniform Commercial Code, provides a statute of limitations, a time limit after which usual legal remedies are no longer available. In absence of negligence or fraud, remember we talked about negligence or fraud, legal action for a breach of sales contract must start within 4 years of the breach, which to me sounds like a long time. 4 years? I can go back and salivate on something for 3.5 years, 3 years, 9 months, 3 years, 12 months, and 29 days, and then, bring a suit against you. But anyway, within 4 years of the breach. Here's the example. So seller's remedies, then we'll go to buyers. Buyer refuses to accept delivery of goods. Store goods for buyer and sue to recover sales price. Resell goods immediately if perishable or if market value might depreciate rapidly. Seller may sue buyer for difference between price goods brought in the resale and price buyer had agreed to pay, and retain goods, and sue buyer for difference between contract price and market price. Something like this almost never happens in B2C world, just so you know. This is a B2B thing. Let me read example 17.6 to shed some light on buyer refuses to accept delivery of the goods. Giorgio placed an order with MedLab Manufacturing Company for specially designed medical laboratory testing equipment. When the equipment was ready for shipment, Giorgio notified MedLab of her intention to cancel the order. MedLab had the right to hold the equipment for Giorgio and sue for the agreed upon purchase price. So again, this is an example of the MedLab folks spending all that money to get the product good, ready for shipment, and then Giorgio tried to back out at the last moment. Now let's talk about buyer refuses to pay the purchase price. If seller still has possessions of goods, seller may resell them. So if somebody says, I'm not paying that, well, it's still mine, I'll just try to resell it to somebody else. If merchandise has already been delivered to the buyer, seller may sue for purchase price. So if you've already gotten the shipment of widgets that I've sent to your facility, and then you say you don't want to buy them, that's an opportunity for me to be able to potentially sue, right? Let's read example 17.7. Malstadt bought a laser printer from Computer Cosmos Company, agreeing to pay cash for it. Computer Cosmos insisted on retaining possession of the printer until the invoice amount was paid in full. When Malstadt failed to pay within the agreed upon time, Computer Cosmos sold the printer to Fishman at a lower price because of a general lowering of prices that took place between the time Malstadt agreed to buy and the time it was sold to Fishman. Computer Cosmos sued Malstadt for the difference between the price Malstadt agreed to pay and the price paid by Fishman. Computer Cosmos was successful in its efforts to recover the difference. So again, this is going to be a lot of B2B stuff, folks. But like this can get a little confusing. Just make sure you read these examples a couple of times that the book has, and you'll have that eureka moment and get the difference between both. Here's another example of seller's remedy. So Kip placed an order with Best Purchases for specially designed medical laboratory. I guess I'm just retelling the same one. Why does he do that? He changed his name. But anyway, I'll read it anyway, just so we repeat ourselves. Kip placed an order with Best Purchases for specially designed medical laboratory testing equipment. When the equipment was ready for shipment, Kip notified Best Purchase of his intention to cancel the order. When the buyer refuses to accept delivery of the goods, the seller may retain the goods and sue the buyer for the difference between the contract price and the market price at the time buyer refused to honor the contract. In this case, Best Purchase has right to hold the equipment for Kip and sue for agreed upon purchase price. So again, just kind of repeating myself from the example of the book, but very easy stuff. Just make sure you read those definitions and those examples a few times. You'll have no trouble. So we've all probably heard the term insolvent, but just basically means you're broke. You've got no money to pay your bills. When buyer is insolvent, seller has a right of stoppage in transit. So if I'm sending, Asia runs a company that or manufacturing facilities that provides widgets to BMW, and she just placed an order for 50,000 widgets, and I find out somewhere between the time she made the order and the product is in transit to her facility that she's insolvent. I've got a right to stop it right then and there. No, you're not getting this. I'm never going to get paid. Right? Stoppage in transit is the right for unpaid seller to stop goods in transit in order carrier to hold them. The right exists for both FOB shipping points and FOB destination points. Remember, FOB shipping point time passes or title passes when the carrier picks up the goods or product, and FOB destination sales is what we see with Amazon. Title doesn't pass until it's the product or good is delivered to the end user, right? Let me read example 17.8. An order of books was en route to Reader's Haven Bookstore, time to arrive in time for a well-promoted author's book signing party. The seller, words in print, notified the carrier not to deliver the books, claiming that it had been received information from a reliable source that the buyer's Reader's Haven was insolvent. Later, it was revealed that the information was an error. Both the publisher and the carrier are subject to Reader's Haven's suit for damages. That kind of flipped it around, right? Where it was the buyer was actually not insolvent, but that was kind of being rumored or said about the individual. And that bookstore needs those books to sell to make money. The books didn't get delivered, they didn't have it to sell, and so they can sue for those damages. All right, buyer's remedies here. So we're moving on from seller's remedies to buyer's remedies. When wrong quantity is delivered, you order 10 of something and 5 shows up, right? If a smaller quantity of goods is delivered than ordered, the buyer may either reject delivery and sue for damages or accept quantity delivered and sue for damages. Now, let me make a point here. You guys are seeing sue for damages. I can imagine if you ordered 5 shirts or 10 shirts from Amazon and 5 showed up, you're not going to try to sue them. Hey, where's my other 5 shirts? But if you're like in a B2B world or a manufacturing world, and I don't get my full order of 10, you know what you've just done to my bottom line and my production schedule? You just destroyed it. Like now, I'm not going to be able to meet the demands of my customers, and I'm losing money because you can't deliver what you promised. So that's why that sue for damages is there. And a lot of times, this is going to be B2B, where large amounts of money and large amounts of materials are being exchanged every day, right? The steel industry, the automotive industry, the aerospace industry, the gas and oil industry. You shortchange some, manufacturing facility that needs the 50,000 widgets to make their product, and you send 20, they're going to be in trouble with their clientele and lose a lot of money. That's why that ability to sue is there. If a larger quantity of goods is delivered than ordered, buyer may reject the entire shipment, accept only what was ordered, and reject the rest, or accept the entire shipment and pay for additional items of the contract price. So let's say I ordered 25,000 widgets to my manufacturing facility and 30,000 show up. I can either say, take the 10,000 back. I want the 20,000 that I ordered and paid for. Or I could say, you know what, go ahead and give me the extra 10,000 because I'm going to need them for next month anyway. And here's your extra payment. Let me read example 17.9. Woodbury Way, an appliance store, ordered 100 microwave ovens from an importer. By mistake, the importer shipped 200. Woodbury was delighted to learn that he had an unexpected bargain because the wholesaler's price is going to be increased as a result of changes in the foreign exchange rate. The buyer has the right to keep the entire shipment and pay for all 200 microwaves at the contract price. All right, when the goods are not as ordered. So I order green widgets and you send me blue widgets, right? Buyer may revoke contract and return goods substantially different from those ordered. If goods have already been paid for, buyer may demand a refund of purchase price. Let's read example 17.10. Suzuki purchased and paid for a standby electric generator for an emergency use at his factory. The seller assured Suzuki that the generator would produce enough power to keep his essential operations going during a power failure. When the generator was tested, however, it failed to produce the sufficient power. Suzuki could demand and obtain a refund. In the instance, Suzuki probably could not show that he had sustained additional damage, so a lawsuit would be unlikely. So, like for example, again, because it's a test. That's what they meant by that last part. where it says in the instance Suzuki probably could not show that he had sustained damages or additional damages, that was because it's like it says earlier in here that during the test, it showed that it couldn't provide the necessary power to keep minimal operations up and running in his factory, right? So you can simply say, I don't want this. I want my money back. I'm going to go look for a generator that actually can meet my needs of power, right? But since it was a test and there was no damages, like, hey, I bought it. We had a 24-hour shift. We had this order to make and keep. A power outage went out. The thing didn't work, and I lost, millions or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in production due to this failure. What you said would actually give me enough power, but actually did not. So because it was a test, no damage accrued, so he was not going to win any lawsuit. Hope that makes sense. All right, more buyer's remedies. When the seller fails to deliver the goods, flat out just left you hanging, right? Buyer may sue for damages or bring a tort action charging conversion. You guys remember what conversion means? I'm not even going to tell you, but look it up. We talked about this in our tort law chapter. You're basically robbing the right of their personal property. You're robbing them the ability to use their personal property. Buyer may sue for damages by bringing tort action charging conversion. If goods are unique, like a work of art, and buyer wants particular goods specified in contract, buyer may seek a court order of specific performance. Make sure you read about that in the book. Just a quick little, I think, italicized word there. A buyer who wishes to obtain goods that are rightfully theirs rather than money damages may sue to obtain them by bringing an action of replevin, an action to recover personal property said or claimed to be unlawfully taken. Buyer may cover, and if chooses to cover, buyer may demand from seller as damages differences between cost of cover and contract price. If title has not yet passed to the buyer, buyer's remedy when seller refuses to deliver at the time and place stated in the contract is a suit of breach of contract. So here's an example. Terry ordered 100 microwave ovens from a wholesaler. The wholesaler made an error and shipped. I've already given this example. I got to update these slides. But anyway, so that's that same example. So he decided to keep the 200 microwaves, get them at that lower contracted price, and take advantage of the mistake in the shipment. All right, so that's chapter 17. Kind of dense, but not a lot goes on here as far as there's going to be some things on the test, but not a lot's going to go on in the final, at least from the previous final. So again, just kind of go through these, various types of contracts again, which was going to talk about. Let me get to the top here and I'll kind of scroll through this really quickly. The law of sales. Make sure you know that this does not include investment securities, real estate, or services. And in times when there's like a plumber, where there's some goods and services, the predominant portion of the contract will determine whether it's a sales contract or a contract for repairs. Make sure you know that. Make sure you know the definition of contract for sale. Definitely know the difference between contract for sale, SALE, which is existing goods, and contracts to sale, SELL, which is future goods. Of course, we've gone over this in our contract chapter: oral, written, express, and implied, entire and divisible. Contracts for labor and materials, very easy concept here. Trial periods and returns, this is something we're probably all familiar with. The auctions, make sure you know the difference between auction without reserve and auction with reserve. Basically, with auction without reserve means that it has to be sold at the highest bidder. So if you got something in there that you got to have $5,000 for or no less, you don't want it with auction without reserve. You want to auction with reserve, meaning it has to go to the highest bidder. Other kinds of conditional sales, we talked about consignment shops, insurable interest, various ways of delivery. Remember, free on board shipping point, free on board destination. The free on board destination title passes when goods are delivered to buyer. This is Amazon, right? Shipping point, titles to goods passes from seller to buyer when carrier receives shipment. And because the buyer is paying for the transportation. If you buy something that to get it shipped to you, you have to buy and you have to pay for shipment. Like sometimes you'll hear, does not cover shipping costs. That means you've got to pay for shipping to pick it up. And when your carrier gets there, you own it right then and there. Talked about various remedies for sellers. Buyer refuses to accept delivery of goods. Buyer refuses to pay the purchase price, so on and so forth. And of course, we talked about seller's remedies, and that rounded up chapter 17. All right, your final question to be counted present for this class. And again, folks, you have to send me your email by tomorrow at 10 p.m. or 11:59 p.m. to be counted present for this class. Let's see, what's your favorite time of the year? So the first question that you got, I'm not going to ask it again, but I asked that early on in the lecture. And the second question is, what's your favorite season of the year? Fall, winter, spring, summer, that type of stuff. That being said, have a wonderful week. We'll see you next Tuesday. Thanks for your patience, and sorry for this unexpected change to our schedule. Have a good week.